The wind had settled low over the plains that evening, brushing the grass with a hush of something sacred. The sun had nearly gone, leaving the horizon painted in bruised colors, violet, rust, and the fading blush of fire. Caleb rode slow, hat tilted forward, his horse weary from the day's long silence. He was a man built from soil and loss, each line on his face carved by seasons of labor and lonesome years. His ranch sprawled wide and quiet behind him, a kingdom of fences, fields, and unspoken prayers. He had learned long ago that peace was not found in people, only in the rhythm of work, the scrape of a shovel, the swing of a gate, the ache that came when the day surrendered to dusk. But that night, the peace was disturbed. Ahead, just beyond the cottonwood trees, a thin curl of smoke rose from the neighboring ranch, the Crawfords'. The sight made his gut tighten. He nudged his horse forward, the air turning sharp, the scent of burning wood carrying something bitter, shame, or maybe grief. As he approached the fence line, he saw her. A woman walking away from the smoke, barefoot, veil trailing through the dust like a torn flag. She moved with the unsteady grace of someone holding herself together out of sheer will. Her dress was white once, but now carried the color of earth. Caleb stopped his horse. The woman kept walking, eyes fixed on the ground, shoulders drawn in against the cold wind. He recognized her from the wedding notices pinned in town. Lily, the bride meant to marry Crawford's son that morning. Folks had spoken about it for weeks. Two families uniting land and name. But as rumor had it, the groom had refused her at the altar, his voice shaking as he called her unfit, claiming she had deceived him somehow. The church had gone silent, and she'd walked away alone while whispers followed her out the door. Now she was here, walking toward nowhere. Caleb dismounted, boots crunching against gravel. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, voice low, weathered like gravel on wood. She stopped but didn't lift her head. Her voice came soft. "I got nowhere else." It wasn't pity that made him offer his hand. It was instinct, something quiet and deep, like the way one might reach to steady a wounded animal. She hesitated, eyes flicking up for the first time. In that brief meeting, he saw something break open, not fragility, but a kind of strength born from surviving cruelty. "Come on," he murmured, turning his horse toward home. "Ain't right for anyone to walk the plains alone." She followed, step slow, the wind catching her hair and tossing it like pale fire in the fading light. When they reached his ranch, she paused by the porch. The house loomed wide and lonesome, built by his own hands after his father's death, more shelter than home. He opened the door, and the warmth of the firelight flickered against her face. She looked like she might turn and run, but something, perhaps exhaustion, perhaps trust, kept her still. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and leather. Caleb set a pot of coffee on the stove while she stood by the hearth, shivering though the fire burned bright. He noticed her hands trembling. Without asking, he handed her a wool blanket. "You can stay the night," he said simply, "till you figure where to go." Her eyes flickered to him, guarded. "Thank you. I won't be a burden." He didn't answer. He just nodded and turned back to the fire. But as she wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, he caught a faint, broken sigh. The sound of a woman holding back everything she hadn't been allowed to say. The night stretched quiet. Outside, coyotes sang their lonely hymns. Inside, two strangers shared a silence that was heavy but not cruel. By morning, she had washed her face and tied her hair back. The wedding dress was gone. She wore one of his late mother's old skirts, too large but clean. She was already in the kitchen, frying eggs like she'd done it all her life. He stood in the doorway, half surprised. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said gently, setting a plate down. "But I needed something to do." He nodded again, awkward, unaccustomed to conversation. The morning light spilled across her face, softening the sharp edges of grief. There was a quiet discipline in her movements, not the gentleness of weakness, but of control. She'd learned to live without expecting kindness. Days became weeks. Word spread fast in town that the rancher had taken in the rejected bride. People talked. They said she must have done something shameful to be turned away. They said Caleb must be desperate for company. He ignored them. Lily seemed to as well, though sometimes he'd catch her standing by the window, staring toward the town road, her expression unreadable. She worked hard, as if work was the only way to stay alive. She cleaned, mended, fed the animals. Her laughter, rare and unsteady, began to fill the spaces that had once been empty. Caleb found himself lingering nearby, inventing excuses to be close. He'd ask about chores he already knew the answer to, or linger by the barn while she hung laundry. One afternoon, he found her kneeling in the dirt beside the barn wall, painting wildflowers with bits of colored chalk she'd found in an old drawer. He stood quietly, watching the colors bloom against the rough wood. Yellow, blue, pink. Her hand moved like a memory of something beautiful. "They're just pretend," she said without looking up. "Flowers that can't die." He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. But that night, when she wasn't looking, he hammered a small wooden frame around the chalk flowers to keep them safe from the wind. The next morning, she saw it. For a long time, she didn't speak. Then, softly, she whispered, "Thank you." It was the first time her voice carried warmth. Summer deepened. The land shimmered gold and alive. Caleb began teaching her to ride, to mend fences, to read the weather from the clouds. She was a quick learner, fearless when the horses spooked, patient when the tools failed. He found himself smiling more, even laughing once or twice, a sound that felt foreign in his throat. But the world outside wasn't gentle. One night, a group of men from the Crawfords' ranch rode over, half drunk and cruel. They found her alone in the yard, feeding the horses. Their voices slithered through the dark, mocking, lewd, unforgiving. "What's it like?" one of them sneered, "being passed from one man's altar to another's porch?" Lily froze. The laughter cut through her like knives. Then the barn door creaked open. Caleb stepped out, shoulders broad, eyes like winter steel. "Get off my land," he said, voice low and even. The men shifted, uneasy. One tried to laugh it off, but Caleb didn't move, didn't blink. The silence stretched until it broke them. They spat in the dirt and rode off, leaving dust and cowardice behind. When they were gone, Lily sank to the ground. Her breath came in sharp gasps, hands covering her face. Caleb knelt beside her, unsure if words could mend what others had torn. She whispered through tears, "They're right. Maybe I don't belong anywhere." He shook his head slowly. "You belong here as much as I do." She looked up at him, eyes shining in the dim light. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she nodded, wiping her cheeks with trembling fingers. After that night, something changed between them. She no longer walked, as if waiting to be judged. He no longer avoided the warmth of her presence. They worked together like two halves of something old rediscovered, steady, unhurried, inevitable. But peace in the west was fragile. The sky turned strange one evening, clouds gathering like bruises across the horizon. The first thunder rolled in heavy and close. Caleb was out mending a gate when the wind struck. The storm came wild and sudden, lightning carving the sky into shreds. He barely made it to the barn before he saw her, Lily, out in the open, trying to lead the horses in from the corral. The rain lashed against her dress, the wind dragging her hair across her face. He shouted her name, but the storm swallowed his voice. He ran to her, caught her arm just as the gate burst loose. The force knocked them both into the mud. For a heartbeat, everything was chaos. Wind, rain, thunder, fear. Then his arms were around her, pulling her close, shielding her body with his. She clung to him, shaking, her heartbeat wild against his chest. When the storm finally broke, they stood under the dripping eaves, drenched, trembling, breathless. The air smelled of rain and earth. Her hair clung to her cheeks, her eyes glistening in the lamplight. He touched her face, a hesitant, reverent gesture. "Lily," he said softly, "I tried to stay quiet, but I can't any more." She stared up at him, lips parted, the world holding still. "I thought I'd stopped needing anyone," he went on, voice rough with honesty. "But you walked in here and made this place alive again. You gave it color. You gave it peace. You gave me back myself." Tears filled her eyes, mixing with the rain. "You don't mean that," she whispered. "I'm the woman someone threw away." He shook his head. "No, You're the woman who taught me what love looks like when it's brave." For a moment, neither moved. Then she pressed her forehead to his chest, sobbing softly, her tears warm against him. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her as if the world might break apart if he let go. Outside, the storm faded to a hush. The ranch lay quiet again, the air washed clean. Inside, beside the flickering fire, she sat wrapped in his old coat, eyes red but shining. He joined her, their silence no longer empty. When she leaned her head on his shoulder, he felt something settle deep within him, a peace he hadn't known existed. And as the night grew still, the flames casting slow shadows across the room, Caleb understood that sometimes the heart finds its home not in the grand or the expected, but in the quiet mercy of two souls brave enough to stay.